Welcome to this week's Rob's Country. We're going to have a look at the swing towards indoor farming as far as dairying is concerned, and a quick look at the red meat industry. But first up, IRD doing a bit of debt recovery.
The government's given quite a significant budget, about 125 million, to go after outstanding returns and debt.
So they're allowed to spend 125 million to get it.
To try and get it back in. And they're really policing it hard. They've stepped up efforts. Normally you'd get a letter in the mail and most people fire it in the ute or in the bin or whatever.
But the dashboard of the ute.
They're not doing that anymore. They'll send you the letter as per normal and you get your statements of account showing what you're overdue by, but then they'll start ringing you. And if they get no success there, they'll ring your accountant, and still no success, then they'll start with the legal proceedings. And they'll take it right through to wind you up if need be.
Really?
Yeah, so they
and if they do,
serious.
If they do wind you up, do you still owe the debt?
If you're wound up, whatever you've got gets sold and it pays the debt. And if there's nothing left after that, they have to write it off. But then, of course, you've got nothing either.
No.
And depending on what sort of structure you've got and what debt it is, you could also be made bankrupt. So it's quite serious if you get to that stage. But there's a lot of legal proceedings underway right now.
The important thing is, though, that actually you don't turn your back on it. You don't flick those envelopes up onto the dashboard of the ute.
Definitely not. No, if you're getting a letter and you know you've got a debt problem, you need to deal with it.
Kerry, how responsive are they? I mean, I have found IRD very, very helpful. I really have.
Yeah, if you're upfront and open and honest with them, they'll listen to you, they'll try and work with you. Talk to your accountant first off, because obviously they've got a better path into IRD than what you might.
Yep.
And you can do a bit of a budget up, see what you can afford, because that's the first thing you need to know, is how much can I afford to pay IRD every week or month or whatever. And then you can go and put a proposal to them. So you can say, right, my debt's so much, I can afford this, and they'll try and come to an arrangement.
I mean, seriously, in my own personal case, it wasn't huge, but it was big enough for me to swallow hard. And they bent over backwards.
Yeah, you know, if you're talking to them, that's what they want. If you keep ignoring them, then you're going to end up with the point where they're not even going to be interested in an arrangement. They just want you to find some way of getting the money in a lump sum. And it is possible. The banks are now open to it. We're finding a number of banks are out there receptive to the fact that they'll lend on tax debt. Previously they didn't want to borrow of it, but now they'll lend, but there's some strict criteria. You can't get back into the debt again. You've got to work more closely with your accountant, and they expect it over a 1 or 2 year period for that loan to be repaid. So it's pretty hard, but at least the bank's there as a sort of a backup now if IRD won't listen.
You're intimating that there's quite a number of people in that sort of scenario.
Yes, yep, it's very easy to do. You know, you might get one return, you send it off and you forget about paying it, you do pay the next one, and then a couple more that you forget to pay or whatever, and with the penalties and interest it adds up very quick. And it's up and down the country. It's not one particular area, not one particular business, it's everything. And it's every tax type. The numbers are quite horrendous when IRD put the annual reports out showing what's owed and who owes what.
Do they still go into your bank account and take what they need if it's there?
Most definitely, they can. Yep, I've seen recently a letter issued to someone that approached us that never had an accountant before and got this letter and said, oh, we've got this demand on our bank account for these funds, can they do it? And legally they're allowed to.
Because the city council can too. Apparently they can go into,
yes.
Well, they get hold of the bank and they instruct the bank.
Yep, and so IRD will just send out a letter to your bank and you'll get a copy in the mail saying this is what we sent to the bank, and they'll just take the money out. And they know what accounts you get because they get interest details from your banks every month.
Yeah,
so they know if you've got funds there and you're not paying them.
Well, you can't open a bank account without putting your IRD number on it.
Exactly, yeah, so you can't hide from that part. So if you've got money, they're going to come after it one way or another.
They don't look under the mattress, though. Not that I've got anything under the mattress, but they don't look under the mattress. But
no.
I mean, people just don't do cash anymore anyway.
No, there's very little of it out there now, but it is one of the areas that IRD are looking at as well, though, is that hidden economy. So,
okay, how are they doing?
Doing very well. In terms of debt recovery, they've got about $4 billion back over the last wee while, which is outstanding for them.
$4 billion?
Yep. So
the outlay was 125 million. That's a good return on
They're
the dollar.
doing very, very well. It's very impressive, and they need to because the debt is horrendous. I don't know what the latest levels are, but it's way up there. So they've got them there, and then the other area they've been focusing on is basically your tax evasion and dodgy taxpayers. And they are aiming for $5 for every dollar spent, and they've been getting $8 back for every dollar they've been spending, so they're well ahead of target there as well.
So this, Kerry, is basically going back over tax returns and going through your bank accounts and see what's coming in.
Yeah, part of it. So they targeted two key areas. There was the property speculation, so those that are dealing in property but not paying their tax as they go, so they do a bit of subdivision or something like that and think it's all tax-free. So they've got them there, and then tax evasion where people aren't declaring their cash, or they're doing all sorts of things basically.
What's the latest on Trade Me? There was a question mark over that at one point.
Yeah, they get a record of who the big traders are, and if you're not matching up with your tax return, they'll come after you.
So there's nowhere to hide.
Definitely not. No, you can't play any games because they'll find you one way or another.
Because it's interesting how, if you look at a baker, for example, and the IRD knows how much flour you're going to need for return, and if you spend that amount on flour, that you'll return for goods over the counter.
Yeah, they definitely know all that. But with your farmers, they know what you're selling. They can see what averages are up and down the country, and you're below those sort of averages, you are going to end up with a red flag at some point on your file.
And I guess if you get 5 GST returns in a row and they're all refunds.
Yep, you're going to get a bit of a question probably put your way. It can happen, but if you're farming and you're not paying at least 1 or 2 returns because you've sold livestock, there's a question as to why not, and you might have a bit of a visit from IRD.
Once again, I guess it's records, isn't it? You've got to have everything, every I dotted and every
you've got to make
crossed.
sure you've got every bank statement, everything going through one bank account if possible for the farm, and you've got the invoice to go with it. Not just relying on the fact, it's on my bank account, therefore I can claim it. You need to have the supporting paperwork, because that's one thing they will look at if they come knocking. They need to see what you actually bought.
And even though it's on the bank account.
Yep. So you could go to CRT and obviously buy a whole pile of farm clothing, but you might be able to buy 1 or 2 other personal items that...
They sell scotch.
Yeah, well, that could go on the bill. And if you put down, CRT, I'm claiming the whole lot, and they find that you've got your scotch on there, they'll disallow it.
That'll be scotched.
Yeah.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh at my own jokes, really. But so once again, it comes right down to you need to have that invoice or that whatever it is that they go ching, 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 ching on the till with.
Yeah, you need that. Every bit of paperwork possible, basically. You just can't... If you can sort of get away with anything under $100 because you don't necessarily have to have it. But we always say, if you've got the paperwork, make sure you keep it. Even if it's under the $100, just keep that bit of paper, because it's always good to put it in front of them to show that you're upfront and honest.
Absolutely, and they do listen to you and they will help with Kerry. Thank you very much indeed. We've got more for you on Rob's Country straight after the break. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Dennis, harvest, I don't really want to talk to you about it because you probably haven't got it all in yet.
Well, Rob, we're looking at a combine harvester there with dual tyres on the front. I think we'll need some on the back as well. But yes, the weather's been shocking, especially at the late end of the harvest, and the reports are bad out for 2 weeks in terms of more rain. We've got drizzle, rain, showers. That's all we seem to get, drizzle, rain, showers. Southerlies, things are really grim out there for the tail end of the harvest. There's a lot of lost crop out there, hundreds of acres of barley that probably won't be harvested now because we've got sprouts on it at least 1 inch long.
Oh, really?
And so even if it is, they put Roundup over it or something like that, it loses its quality, it loses its weight. It's going further into the ground. You get soil in combines and all sorts of things. There's bypass peas there that were due to be harvested that have been left for the ducks. There's even ryegrass. We've talked about late maturing ryegrass before. Well, this is late. This is ryegrass and clover crops that just won't be harvested, can't be harvested.
So, Jens, that's going to put a huge amount of pressure financial pressure onto some farmers.
Well, it certainly is. Those farmers that are in the heavy country where the crops are planted late and they historically harvest them late. I know one farm with 140 acres of barley. Now that's a serious financial problem, and we hear lots and lots about droughts, and that's at the front end. And of course, farmers lose lots of crops through drought as well, but you don't actually see it. But once you've grown it and you see it, that's at the tail end, and we certainly can pump water on, but we can't
take it off.
Can't take it
off.
off.
You can't put a shed over the top.
No.
All your inputs are all in there, so it's cost you a fortune already.
It has indeed. You've got all the way through, and a lot of those late crops require extra, crazy, but extra irrigation and extra fungicides at the tail end of their growth season. So and straw shorteners and things like that, and it all goes out there, and so that's quite a major. So I imagine there's quite a few of those farmers also will be hit with tax bills from the previous season that they've just paid. and things are not looking good in terms of their income from this coming year. And there'll be some provisional tax requirements as well.
I think it's really a case to talk to your accountant to see if you can come. We've just been talking about doing deals with IRD.
Absolutely, because if you're coming, 31st of March has been, but some people have a June balance date, and certainly if it's not looking very good and you're stacked up with some pretty hefty provisional tax bills from the previous year, you'll be looking for some relief. You'll need some relief on the way through, I would think.
But what happens to, I mean, you've got a barley crop that's standing there with sprouting. What do you do with it? You have to plough it in, or what's the story?
Well, it could end up as green manure. If the whole thing collapses on the ground and you get the barley growing, you're probably best to bury it as green manure. But there's no doubt about it, the ducks will be in. You'll have struggling to burn it.
Because it's wet and heavy and...
Absolutely, and you can do so much with Roundup, you can do so much with Reglone and in trying to desiccate those crops and dry them out, but where you're having to pull the combine into the field behind a tractor, we're talking sort of European conditions, it's just hopeless. So you just give up.
Dumb question, I suppose, but we haven't been able to get it dry enough to be able to harvest it and then dry it in a drying unit.
Well, we have in some instances. There's been a lot of neighbours helping each other out with combines, and I know one farmer that's got quite a tonnage of barley in his silos at 17% moisture. He thought it was 16, but the buyers tell him it's 17, and that doesn't really want to sit around for very, very long. And farmers are sort of got the feeling that okay, it's in the silo now. I can take a deep breath. It's safe. It won't be safe for very long. It's 17% moisture. So
it's going to start heating?
Yes, it'll start heating and generating its own fungal growth from that heat, and then that attracts insects as well, and then they multiply and feed and generate extra heat too. And so, very soon if it's a silo of silo, all you need to do is add some yeast and some water in a tap. It will be.
I'm sorry, but you've got to find something mirthful in there, don't you?
Well, you do. I've approached silos in the past, and you actually smell them before you even open the door, and it's fermenting.
So you're talking there about cereals and ryegrasses, and what about some of your very specialist crops, the ones that are?
Well, there's quite a few carrot crops and radish crops out there. The carrot crops are, unfortunately, most of them are in the windrow rather than still standing. The radish crops are a direct heating proposition in pods and up off the ground, and historically a late crop. But and a lot of them we've used Reglone on them, the desiccant, to try and dry them out and to allow sunshine. That's a joke. Sunshine and air to move through those crops. So I'm due to actually go around to quite a few and just see how they're doing, but generally we get away with it. There is a fallback position, which could be whole pod harvesting of those crops, huge volumes, but whole pods. So the secret is that, say in a radish, you're taking a very soft seed out of a pod that's almost corky, and you have to take that soft seed out of cork without crunching it up. And that's the secret of harvesting radish. But if you harvest the whole pod and you open the whole combine up, there'll be a lot less potential damage on that seed, and then you can dry the pods. And you're talking truck and trailer loads of pods, but ultimately you can dry them quite quickly because the air gets through them, and then you can put them through a whole pod thresher in the store. So once they're dry, so it's been done before. It'll possibly be done again this year.
By the sound of it. What about the contracts that people have signed and now they can't fulfil?
Well, yes, acts of nature come into play. There's all
a lot
sorts
of downstream stuff. I mean, the guys that they've got a contract with can't supply their people.
Absolutely, the flow-on effect is quite huge. You've got carriers involved, you've got dressing plants involved, you've got MAF involved. You got just when things disappear and the volumes aren't there, there's lost market opportunities. There's all sorts of things, but sometimes all you can do is do your very best. We had a field of clover at home. We put MCPA on it to slow it down, Reglone on it to crisp it up. Then we windrowed it. Then it rained for 2 weeks, turned to rubbish. Then we had to undercover it with a Rosatis double knife mower. picked it up with a draper pickup, dressed it that afternoon and dried it that night. That was just to harvest the white clover.
Dennis, I don't know how you do it. I really don't. Thank you very much indeed. Well, speaking of weather, there seems to be, as Patrick Phelps found out, a bit of a swing towards indoor dairy farming in New Zealand.
New Zealand's farmed its cows out mostly outdoors for the last, probably over 100 years. What's changing that you think, requires a system change?
Oh, well, now we realise that these cows are dropping a lot of nitrogen in their urine down into the soil and that it's going down into the water. It's been happening for a long time, but now that we're farming more intensively, it's got even worse, and it's clear we've got to do something about it.
Does an indoor system mean a high input system?
An indoor system is a high input system, so it's going to have high costs, but the key question is whether you can spread those costs over increased production, so your overall cost of production per litre of milk or kilogram of milk solids is hopefully no higher. And that's what we've got to work on to get those systems right so that the costs aren't too high.
We've talked about environmental. Just on the environmental note, surely they're still producing the same amount, possibly more, urine and effluent. That's still got to go somewhere at some stage. So does that require quite big storage systems? How do they work?
Yes, a lot of the cost of having housed cows is that you really do need big effluent systems. You need big ponds. You need systems to separate off the solids from the liquid part. From an environmental point of view, all the benefits come from being able to control when and where the effluent goes, and that costs money.
So let's just talk about animal welfare, I suppose. There's two extremes, aren't there? Very hot and very cold, and the benefits you get from an indoor system with that. Do you just want to explain those?
Animal welfare is an important issue, but the Europeans and the Americans have been working on this for many years. And if there were significant animal welfare issues, then it would show up in animal health and it would show up in poor production. The reality is that the cows actually rather like being inside most of the time. It's not unlike us. We like to go outside for an hour or two or three, and then we like to come back inside where it's not too hot and it's not too cold. So the cows that are inside, in the winter they do need a little bit less feed because it's not so cold. But yes, in a cow, the rumen of a cow, it's like an enormous furnace. And in summertime, cows actually suffer from heat stress. Once again, want to get away from that sun and the heat. So there are benefits. The cow is putting a lot less effort into walking out around the paddocks every day. She's spending less energy keeping warm in winter, and she's less stressed in summer. Now, there are some horror stories about housed cows, but those stories exist for cows out on pastures as well. So it's all about monitoring, making sure the systems are right. And the simple answer is that in most places of the world, the cows are housed. Those cows typically produce twice as much milk as New Zealand's cows out on pasture. And without wanting to say that there's only one way of doing it, now's the time when we've got to open our minds and look again at the alternatives to our traditional pasture system.
And I think the other thing too is not walking to and from the shed every day. They're not getting lameness or any stones in their feet or anything. Do you want to mention that at all? Or?
Yeah, one of the quite important issues of the traditional pasture system is lameness, and this is related to the amount of walking they do and on hard surfaces. Now, there are other health issues when you bring the cows inside. Once again, these are all manageable. Most of the world has learnt how to manage those, and if the health issues were significant, then the cows wouldn't produce the milk. I know some farmers that I know of one farmer in particular who has a system where he's only got enough shed space for the cows to be inside one day and outside the next. so they share the housing system. And there's no doubt that the cows want to go back into the house rather than going out into the paddock a lot of the time.
So if this is a big change, how do you go about convincing not only farmers but also the general public that this might be a viable option?
Well, a lot of farmers are already convinced this is a viable option. So there are many farmers who are saying, oh no, this is not for us and we would hate that system. That's fine. But there's actually, we think there's more than 300 farmers in New Zealand who now have some form of off-paddock wintering. So there are lots of people out there who are testing the boundaries, working out different ways of doing things. Now, from my own perspective, I'm just really keen to get out there and learn from all these farmers. The learnings don't initially come from research institutions. There's a whole lot of farmers out there that are pushing the boundaries, doing exciting new things. And in many cases, it will be farmers learning from other farmers. And we need to make sure that we capture the learnings and the knowledge of these pioneers out there who are developing these new systems. So we've got to capture their knowledge and then make it available to other people. But of course, we've also got to convince the urban population that this is a good thing to do, and that means we've got to have total transparency.
I don't think it's the thing of the future, I think it's the thing of the present. After the break, we'll be talking about irrigation. Welcome back to Rob's Country. I guess we should talk about irrigation because we've been talking about rain, but there is an end to the season.
Certainly is, yeah. Since the last week, 10 days ago, we had that big rain. Soil temperatures have actually dropped something like, from 16 degrees down to that 10 to 12 degrees now, which is, your 10 degrees is your sort of where the grass is going to grow and it's not going to grow.
And this is nationwide now, isn't it? We're closing down all over the place.
Yeah, pretty much, yep, yeah. In Christchurch, we've had half our annual rain already, and it's only 3.5 months into the year. So,
who would go farming? Really?
Well, nature's got a way of evening things out. So, what's going to happen?
You're not going to get it later or whatever.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
Great excitement in the irrigation industry about the North Island getting their system.
Yes, yep, yeah, Ruataniwha, yes.
That's going to be exciting for everybody up there and for everyone else because the flow on.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's not only just the farmers that are going to get the water. There's going to be industries that'll pop up to help out these with the farmers and their irrigation systems.
And there's bankers wandering around there with big grins because they've got surety as far as weather's concerned.
Yes, that's right. Yep. Yeah, and it provides the farmers surety as well.
Yeah.
So
you brought some gizmos in.
Yeah, I thought we should perhaps talk about soil moisture monitoring. We've got a selection. Well, they've got the three here that we probably do recommend, primarily because they're a digital sensor. There's digital output as opposed to an analogue output. Unfortunately, analogue outputs some diurnal fluctuations, so the actual temperatures, day-night temperatures, affect the soil moisture.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the digitals actually have accounted for that. So
how do they work? What should we know about these things?
What should you know? The important things is installation is probably critical. Depth of installation and obviously location. Like take this one for example. This one here. It's only sampling that small subset of soil there.
Yep.
So it's critical you get it in the right spot. Same with this one here. This one here, the Aquaflex. It's a 3 metre tape. It's a bit longer. You can sample a bit more soil with it.
Does it vary depending what the topography of the paddock is?
Certainly does. I mean, you wouldn't install these at the top of a hill or the bottom of a gully. Obviously, the top of the hill is going to be too dry. The bottom of the gully is going to be too wet. So somewhere in the middle. Average to most farmers know what their soils are like and how they go. So you're looking at an average to below average soil moisture area.
And as far as different crops are concerned, some crops are obviously surface rooting and lucerne's way down the bottom.
Yeah, these are primarily into permanent pastures because you need to install these, and some of them have a settling period, some don't. So you don't really want to be ripping these up each season and putting them back down again. Just want to keep them in there.
These are permanent, so
Correct.
a farmer would say, okay, we're going to test these paddocks, and he or she will not go anywhere near them again. It'll come up on a computer.
Correct.
You guys don't go rushing around in your ute.
No, we don't
Well,
need
you
to.
used to.
Yes, yeah, we still do. Yeah, but we don't. No, we don't need to with these. The critical things with these is they need to be calibrated to soils, particular soils. These, likes of these ones here, are calibrated in a lab in America, so it's to lab conditions, they're not to the New Zealand soils conditions. So they do need to be calibrated. And interestingly, 9 out of 10 calibrations that we do are under notify the amount of soil moisture.
Oh, okay,
So
so
they're
that's sort
not-
of underestimate it.
Underestimate, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
So it's quite important. So you get more readily available. It's probably what I'm trying to say is 9 times out of 10 you've probably got more readily available water in the soil than you actually think if you're using these. So calibration is important.
Because it's interesting, I mean, we talked to a farmer from Mid-Canterbury last week, I think, if not the week before, it doesn't matter, and all his staff have got little laptops, and they can see at the drop of a hat at any time of the day or night what the temperatures are. And what
Yep,
the,
all these can be programmed. In fact, probably the best one is it goes to a website, a web portal. You can either get into the computer and look at the web portal, or you can actually get an email sent to you. So guys can get an email on their iPhones or their fancy Android phones, whatever they call them, and they can just look up and say, yep, I need to irrigate in a couple of days. Just go and push that button.
I mean, you and Tony must be just shaking your heads at how far you've come in the last few years.
Yes, yeah, it's come a long way, and there's more coming on. There's even more sensors we've been given this season to trial, just as a comparison to them all.
And then, of course, you branch off into the actual systems that you guys were able to do calibration for and all that sort of thing.
Yes, yeah. Well, we pretty much calibrate these as well.
So you still do rush around in your utes a bit.
Oh, we do. You know, you can see that for this one, for example, I mean, it's critical the distance between these two wires here. So if you hit a stone when you're putting that in and put it out, it's going to put everything out. So that's why we say installation is critical. And in Canterbury, we've got a lot of stones flying around in the soils and that.
And up in Hawke's Bay, you wouldn't be too good either.
Yeah. So, and they need perfect contact with the soil for them to work properly. So.
Once they're installed, obviously you've got to be a wee bit careful where you do your ploughing, and you put them in pasture, but you have to mark them. And are they pretty stock-proof?
Yes, yep. Like everything's buried. Like you put this has got a 5 metre cable on it, for example. I think that one's got a 5 metre cable, so you can bury it sort of 4 metres away from a fence post. So you bury it right up the fence post, and away it goes.
Brilliant. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for doing that, because I've often wondered how you know so much about when to push that little green button and when to not push it.
Yes, yeah.
Well, thank you very much indeed. We're going to do a little bit of an update now. Patrick Phelps also went out and caught up with Blair Gallagher and had a look at the red meat industry.
Blair Gallagher's lived on this sheep and beef farm since he was 4 years old. He's a farmer in Canterbury's foothills and an executive of the Meat Industry Excellence Lobby Group, who hope to restructure a model they say isn't working. One of their goals is to achieve consolidation in the industry.
We've got 2 co-ops that farmers own, Alliance and Silver Ferns, that supply or process 54% of the sheep meat industry in New Zealand. And unfortunately, they're going head-to-head, not on a dwindling supply base in procurement, but also in the marketplace.
Mr Gallagher says the lobby groups are where Silverfern Farms and Alliance Group aren't the only players.
The other 45% of the industry is privately owned. So the next part of our strategy is to try and reform that by getting committed and contractual supply.
Current statistics show 6 to 7% of sheep and beef land is being converted to dairy and dairy support every year. This poses serious threats.
And that's putting real problems on the outlets for store stock. Not only store lambs, store cattle, breeding ewes, and also the dairy farmers, because they're more profitable, they can compete directly for any feed and can pay more than sheep and beef farmers.
For anyone unfamiliar with the term store stock, many farmers grow their sheep and cattle up to a certain point, then sell them as store stock to a finishing farm. Finishing requires prime agricultural land, the sort leased out for dairy support. He says another big issue is overcapacity. In other words, too many meatworks, not enough meat.
We've got a shrinking supply, too much capacity in the industry, and we haven't got a coordinated, consolidated entity looking at procurement but also in the marketplace. So that's the fundamental problem we've got.
Mike Salverson's the Federated Farmers Meat and Fibre spokesman for Mid-Canterbury. He's a sheep and beef farmer just up the road from Mr Gallagher. He doesn't think it's all doom and gloom. He says some prices are relatively high.
Venison's low at the moment, but there are particular reasons for that, which relate to the European economy as opposed to what's happening here. The lamb market is it's not historically high, but it's historically higher than base level sort of thing. And along with a very strong currency, we're still selling overseas in USD and GBP at quite high levels.
In spite of this, Mr Salverson says changes need to be made to the makeup of the sector to address the issue of overcapacity, but those changes must come from within. Another issue he mentions is the location of processing plants.
Alliance sold one plant last year in Christchurch, which was easily developable land, and as opposed to other plants in other parts of the country, which are in remote small country towns, which therefore mean there's a liability rather than a value if the plant was closed.
He says in such situations, it's easier for the companies to just keep those plants ticking over. When asked about the problems caused by the growth of dairy, he says for individual farmers, there's opportunity, but for the sector it poses a threat through reduction of supply. Mr Salverson says farmers could help by giving security of supply to the meatworks.
Most farmers have supplied the same companies by and large for many years. What they haven't done is ever signed a bit of paper to say they're going to for the following year. So there's nothing the meat company can do to sort of bank it or say they've got this much secure supply coming through for the season.
Blair Gallagher says it's important for the country's economy the red meat sector does well.
We are getting too reliant on dairying. We've got too many eggs in one basket, and at the moment, we've got incredible demand for our protein, but we're just not delivering the best profitability model back to the whole industry.
It's definitely time we had a pretty hard look at it, I think. After the break, we've still got some law chatting, and we'll also be chatting to Federated Farmers. Back to Rob's Country. Annual plans, are they a minefield? Because you're right into that.
Yeah. I wouldn't say they're a minefield. I used to hate working on annual plans, to be honest, because it's council budgets, it's dry, yes, unintelligible stuff. But actually, I really enjoy it because what it does is it gets an immediate result for our members. So we basically get the council budget. What they're doing is right there, their activities and how they're going to pay for them. Our local members and myself supporting them go in and we submit on it, go to the hearing, and often we can get some really great results straight away, which returns value for being involved in Federated Farmers. So
what sort of thing? Because you're actually saying, well, we don't want you to spend that money there, or you're spending too. Or how far can you go is what I'm trying to say.
Well, obviously every council in New Zealand has duties they have to achieve, and they've got to provide roading services, they've got community groups that want different things, and it can be a real struggle to make that all come together. And I think that our involvement can be really valuable in just trying to get that better rating outcome. And also, because if we're not involved, I think that rates paid by farmers would quickly get out of hand, because they often have quite high value properties relative to the services that they demand from the council or that they receive. And there's potential there if there's too much of a weighting on property value and not enough on, say, targeted rates or uniform charges, that rates could get very, very high. And we do see that from time to time, and when that happens we have to really get in there and explain how, to the council, the position that farmers are in,
So you're sort of really trying to make them change their mind on how much they can extract from the rural sector.
Well, yeah, that, but also just achieving better management overall. I mean, for example, Tasman District their long-term 10-year plan that involves an annual increase in debt. Every year the debt just gets higher and higher and higher and higher, to where it's incredibly high. And their whole council structure was set up on that. And what it was going to do was impoverish future generations of the council and take away from the current generation. The future generations coming up now. So effectively those living beyond their means. And this year's annual, and last year we went in there and we explained how debt and, debt works, and because farmers have quite a perspective on debt. And we just laid it out really as to how it was just going to really undermine the ability of the council to do their job properly in the future, how it was taking away from current generations and how they had to rethink what they do. And this year in the annual plan, we've got a totally different approach to debt. And the council are committed to no further, reducing debt over time. And they've just done a whole lot of changes. Well, we persuaded them that they needed to do it and take that issue seriously. Yeah, I'm not sure we taught them, but we certainly went in there and did all we could to persuade them. Another great example this year is the Selwyn bus routes. Currently, when it still is in place, the bus route that goes out to Rolleston, around to Lincoln and back into town, properties within 500 metres of the bus route, all properties are rated as if they were urban properties, and they pay a weighted rate based on I think it's capital value of their property. And some farms we know are paying upwards of $3,000 or $4,000. I know one farmer who was for the bus, whereas people occupying sections in town were paying $80 or $90 on exactly the same rate. And this year we've got a proposal, having after us going in there and explaining to Environment Canterbury, writing to them and laying out what the issue was, we've now got a proposal to take those properties out of the urban rating district and put them in the rural rating district. So they still pay for the bus route, but they pay a much lower amount. Well, that's the proposal anyway. We'll see what comes out of the hearing. So we get, like I said, we get an immediate result, which is brilliant, which is quite different to some of our other involvement with councils, where it's an ongoing process and involvement in environmental management, trying to get wise environmental decisions, particularly regarding water quality and the future of how we want it to be and how we're going to get there. And that's a long-term thing where there's no immediate payoff, but it's incredibly important we're involved. Council budgets are different, there's just a straight-out benefit to our members, which, is all the more reason to be a member.
Well, exactly. Please push his membership as hard as you want to. Because, I just think that it's absolutely vital that every farmer in New Zealand is benefiting. So get in there.
Yeah.
You're an advocate, really. You just go, but you do get access, obviously, to the annual plans, and you can go whistling in and.
Oh, everyone does. Yeah. The annual plans, they're all online on the council websites. Some of them are posted to me directly, but mostly I just go online and look at them and go in and submit. So under the Local Government Act, there's a formal consultation process the council goes through, and anyone can be involved in that process. I actually encourage anyone to do that, because it can be really interesting getting involved in council. Once you get involved in annual plans, you work out how the council works. And over time, some people go from that to actually standing for the council and getting involved in the administration of the council. That, it belongs to your community anyway, you might as well be involved.
Excuse me. What sort of language is it written in? Because a lot of that sort of stuff is in bureaucratic language rather than English, in my view.
Oh, come on.
you know what I'm saying. It's like it's all this sort of da 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 da. Well, I could have summed it up in one sentence.
Well, I think, to be fair, it's not too bad. I think most councils are pretty good at summarising their annual plans, and certainly when you get into the budgets, you need to be. It really helps if you have some familiarity with budgets and accounts and whatnot, and if you don't have much to do with that stuff, that can be really hard. But to be fair, most councils summarise their annual plans really well and clearly, and so you can see what's happening. But then there's the language of your rates demand, isn't there?
Well, exactly.
And there's some, and that can be different language as well.
I mean, that's why I just get totally lost when people say, what about submissions on the water plan and all that sort of I go, I'm sorry. But I mean, it's fairly great. And you do this for how many different councils?
I'm submitting on 6 this year. But basically the Federated Farmers Policy Team will submit on every council where there's any farming activity. We do every council every year on the annual plans because it's so significant for our members. There's that direct payout that I talked about and that direct return of value for our membership. So we do every council.
Well done, and enjoy.
Oh, well.
We've got more for you here on Rob's Country, straight after the break. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Fleur, gifting, it's a subject which is a bit confusing.
It is a little bit confusing, Rob, and it's one that's really important to get right. There's been some changes both in relation to gift tax and the way that the Ministry of Social Development handle gifting in regards to residential care subsidies. So it's really pertinent and very important you get great advice.
So what are the main areas that we should be looking at when we are looking at gifting?
I think that the most important thing, Rob, is that for many, many years we as solicitors have had our clients gifting their family trusts at $27,000 per person, and that's the IRD, the limit before the 1st of October 2011, I beg your pardon, was $27,000 per person before you attracted any tax.
Yep.
So it became a natural level that the MSD, Ministry of Social Development, also used for residential care. It's not the case anymore. They are now being quite stringent about their gifting processes, and the maximum you are allowed to gift in any 1 year is $27,000 per application. And an application will refer to both your funds and your gifting and your husband or partner's funds and their gifting. So it's not
they've basically reduced it
to $27,000 total, so $13,500 each. So it's going to take a whole lot longer to gift that average family home into a family trust, which is what most of us do, a normal family trust.
It's going to take you for years.
It is going to take you for years. So it's really important that when you're talking to your accountant and your legal advisor about why you want a family trust, that you think really hard about what the purpose is. Is it for creditor protection because you've got your own business? That's still a really grand idea. Is it for relationship property protection because these days you never know if forever is going to be forever? So that is still a really grand idea. If it's specifically so you don't have to worry about being ineligible for residential care subsidy later on in life, not one of the best reasons of having a family trust anymore.
So if you have a family trust and you want your house or your farm or whatever to go into it, is the trust able to buy it? Or, I mean, 27,000 or 13,500, whatever it is.
Yeah, 13,500
I mean, it's
per
going to take
person.
you a million years to do it.
It is going to take you a million years to do it, and that's why you're going to need really good advice, Rob, because if you were to take an average family farm, I'd say that's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not the low
It's
millions.
probably going to be millions, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're looking at that kind of money, you just do a straight gift into the family trust. Work and Income are going to look at that later on when you're applying for your residential care subsidy and go, well, actually, you over-gifted in 2014 by $999,900 and
some change.
And some change, 73,000, and we're going to add that back into your financial means assessment, and you'll have to use that money before we're going to consider you eligible for residential care. So you have to be very, very careful about why you're doing it.
And I guess the other thing is that if you've got a whole lot of cash and you think you're going to go into residential care, you can't sort of flick that away either, can you?
No, you can't.
There must be a time when they say, you knew.
Absolutely. If they can see that you've endeavoured to deprive yourself of an asset, they've got some really stringent guidelines in the Social Securities Act, and they will claw that back. And again, you won't be eligible for residential care until you've used that portion of your assets.
The main, you said 2 or 3 other reasons. One was
creditor protection.
Yep.
relationship property protection.
Exactly.
Those kinds of things, still fantastic reasons to have a family trust.
And you can...
In that situation, you might want to gift that whole lump sum because at the end of the day, you want the protection for that asset straight away. The gifting's not so much of an issue for you. You've got other reasons to want to protect it right now. Residential care subsidy over time, a little bit of gifting at $13,500 per person in a couple. It's going to take a jolly long time to get it all sorted away, so you need to be very careful and very clear on why you're doing what you're doing.
So when you start a trust, you've got to declare why you're doing it then, if that's the case?
I don't know that you've got to declare it, but you've got to have it very firmly in your mind, because then that's going to, it's going to provide the reasoning behind why you're gifting, what you're doing, how you're doing it, whether you're doing it at a lump sum, whether you're doing it over time. It's really very, very important that you get very good advice.
And of course, not one, there's no sort of fits all.
No, absolutely not. If nothing else, now a family trust is going to be very much case-by-case basis, whether it's going to be a good idea for you, whether it's going to be a good vehicle, whether you should think about doing something else.
Thank you very much for there. And first phone number, care of Harmon's, on your screen now. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you've just missed Rob's Country, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.